walkouts, walkthroughs, and who's actually in charge. On now, Liberty, Literacy, and Legacy with Christina Bogus and Emily Green.
Welcome to Liberty, Literacy, and Legacy. I am Christina Bogus, and today I am here with Emily Green as we examine education as it actually functions, not as it trends and not as it performs online, but it is governed in statute, structured in policy, and experienced by families. Liberty is not sustained by slogans, and literacy is not developed through disruption, and legacy is not accidental. It is built through disciplined institutions that understand their mandate. And if public education is a constitutional responsibility, and in Utah it is, then clarity matters. So today we're going to separate protected speech from institutional confusion. We're going to separate civic formation from mission drift, and we're going to ask a simple question. During instructional hours, who's actually in charge? Let's get started. I think we need to start with a sentence that apparently needs to be restated in 2026 America, and that statement is simple. Schools are not public parks. They're not civic plazas. They're not staging grounds. They are custodial institutions operating under compulsory attendance law. And the question isn't whether students have First Amendment rights. They do. The question is whether schools have the authority, or rather the obligation, to release minors to the streets during those instructional hours to preserve those rights. Spoiler alert, release to the streets is not recognized legal doctrine. Under Utah Code 53G-6-201, every school-age child is subject to compulsory education. And under 202, parents are legally responsible to ensure attendance during the school year. So when students leave campus during instructional hours for a coordinated walkout, this isn't merely an expressive activity. It intersects directly with compulsory attendance laws, in which there is no carve-out in Utah statute titled Release to the Streets. That doctrine simply does not exist. When students walk out during school hours, our administrators are not neutral in the event. They are actually acting custodians, and that custodial duty does not evaporate because the cause might feel morally urgent.
So also under both federal precedent and state attendance statutes, schools function in the tutelary capacity. So the Supreme Court has consistently affirmed that students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate, but those rights operate within the structured environment of the school. The controlling standard from Tinker versus Des Moines is whether conduct materially and substantially disrupts the work and discipline of the school. A coordinated walkout during instructional hours is by definition a disruption of instructional time. That does not criminalize protest. It does clarify jurisdiction, and I think this is the key point that all parents and schools should be addressing. Compulsory attendance laws impose a legal duty on parents and schools. When students leave campus without authorized dismissal, the question becomes administrative. Was that absence excused? Was supervision maintained? And was risk assessed? Additionally, schools operate under a statutory duty of supervision and order. Utah Code 53G-8202 states and authorizes local education agencies to adopt conduct and discipline policies to maintain a safe and orderly learning environment. More importantly, 53G-8209 outlines the parameters for student conduct and discipline, including actions that disrupt school operations. The legal standard aligns with federal precedent from Tinker versus Des Moines. Student expression is protected unless it materially and substantially disrupts schoolwork or invades the rights of others. A coordinated walkout during scheduled instructional time is by definition a disruption of the instructional program. And I've been following these protests happening all over the United States, and the situations that have developed should bring everyone to attention. It has for me, and I'll highlight some brief examples. A special needs boy became lost during a protest, called his mother, who did not know that he had left the school to participate in this. She had to come and find him. A mother, upon arriving at her daughter's school, did not know what was going on, and in a panic approached the protesting students about what was happening, a fair question for what she arrived to. And she ended up getting attacked by these students. There is video of this event, and it shows a male student taking his wood protest sign and slamming it down on her head. It is what he was aiming for. Fortunately, it was blocked by a gentleman, but she was then attacked beyond that. We have trucks that have come and blown exhaust at students throwing rocks at cars and damaging buses. We have large parades protesting through the halls of our schools as they exit the building, and our children are being placed in extremely vulnerable and dangerous situations. And just this week, a student was hit by a car while participating in one of these protests during school hours.
Yeah, Emily, it's really concerning. And I think what we need to ask is that if students leave campus without authorization, administrators are no longer debating viewpoint neutrality. They are actually managing what we call supervision liability. And it's simple. Once a minor exits campus during school hours, the school's custodial duty, interestingly enough, does not magically dissolve. That duty exists and persists precisely because minors are compelled to be there under Utah law, and you can't compel attendance and then disclaim responsibility for the well-being of students.
Also, Utah law is explicit about school grounds. So if you cite 53D 8203, this grants school officials authority to control conduct on school property and at school sponsored activities. So the moment that a walkout becomes unsupervised, egress into public roadways, traffic corridors, or adjacent commercial zones, the issue transfers and transitions from expressive rights to safety governance. So police departments reminding students to remain on sidewalks are not suppressing speech. They are enforcing traffic law and public safety standards. So the legal framework distinguishes between you have protected speech, you have disruption of instructional time, unauthorized departure, public safety risk, and conflating those categories creates institutional confusion. And that is why we are here today, because there's been enough events happening in our state alone. Expand that out to states all over the United States of America, there is institutional confusion. And so we hope that today this will help those listening to understand parents, students themselves, and administrators. So any institutions survive on clarity and their infrastructure. The legal distinction is simple. Within the confines of school dress code, wear your shirts, that's protected. 2, school sanctioned release of minors into public traffic corridors equals liability exposure. Failure to maintain order during school hours equals administrative responsibility. And the most important, the rule of law is not hostility to protest. It is actually the framework that keeps protest from becoming chaos.
I would absolutely agree. I think, Emily, as we move into this, we also need to discuss what I'm going to call mission drift. And I'm going to use your words. You often say, why do we send our children to school? And when we see these things happening, we have mission drift. When you're talking about police departments and guidance on sidewalks, and school districts quietly saying they support student voices, but then quietly marking them unexcused, or worse, marking them excused when they are actually not under our code lines. When administrators are outraged that parents are filming what happened outside their school buildings, that is the very institutional confusion you talk about. We have to remember that our schools either have lawful authority or they have vibes. And the chaos is clear. We don't have order in our institutional infrastructure or within our institutions. And the simultaneous signaling of tacit approval of these organized walkouts is not clarity. It's actually a very overt and very poignant form of mixed governance. Under Utah Code, schools are required to track attendance and truancy patterns. And we have been told over and over again that chronic absenteeism already destabilizes academic performance statewide, yet we treat these instructional minutes as elastic during a literacy deficit. It just has to stop.
I understand. And I know that in the state of Utah right now, absenteeism is a big topic. We talk a lot about it at the board. You know, we put funding towards it recently. I think we recognize there's a lot that changed in the last, 6 years or so about attendance. It is something that we're trying to address, but at the root of that argument, we're recognizing that being at school actually has a positive impact on our students. And we also come back to that question, why do we send our kids to school? Parents are communicating. They want their kids to know how to read. They want them to know how to do math. And I think it's a fair request. That request doesn't go out of style. What we are seeing come into style, though, is this different realm of activism that is occurring. And I would argue not addressing the walkouts that are happening in the protests at this large scale throughout the United States of America, we are setting a precedent for why we send our kids to school. And so what we're trying to do, again, is to bring this conversation to case law, to Utah code, to policies that exist within school districts, the rights of parents to know that their children are receiving a quality education, and that local school districts understand where their lane needs to stay, and that legally they're posturing themselves to be balanced. So Utah protects student speech, Utah mandates attendance, Utah authorizes schools to maintain order, Utah requires districts to supervise minors in their custody. Those statutes can coexist, but they require disciplined implementation. And a school may allow structured civic expression within policy parameters. It may not abdicate supervisory responsibility under the banner of neutrality. And so when we seem to start getting confused about this argument, because, they're free speech. They're just fine. Well, their parents excuse them. The public needs to understand, and I think our school districts need to be reminded of what actually exists.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there that we cannot abdicate our supervisory responsibility under the banner of neutrality. That was such a good statement. And when we see the viral footage of students in the streets during second period, the question should never be, do students have First Amendment rights? The question should really be, under Utah code, who authorized that departure? How was supervision maintained? And how were those absences coded? Was there a liability analysis conducted when these students were released to the streets unlawfully? Because liberty without lawful structure is simply volatility.
And the beautiful part about when institutions preserve credibility, when they demonstrate the following things, it becomes a win-win. When you let it veer off and we're all confused, it's only a mess. It's like riding a motorcycle, and not against anybody that rides motorcycles.
Yep.
But there is a saying that's like, it's not a matter of if, it's when you wreck your bike.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are choosing to release our students to the street under circumstances that will become out of the school's control, I would argue, and we are seeing, because the receipts are coming in, it's not a matter of if, it's when something goes wrong. And parents, you need to recognize it's your students. Teachers that might be high-fiving those students as they go out that door and saying, look at that Army go, look at that Army go. With all due respect, they are hidden safely within the walls of that institution, just like they are supposed to. Now, again, somehow the adults are protected, but our minors are on the streets completely vulnerable and under law. I mean, it just blows my mind.
It does me
So
too.
what we want institutions that preserve their credibility when they demonstrate policy clarity, attendance integrity,
Yeah.
supervisory discipline,
Mm-hmm.
transparent communication with parents about those. Parents need
Yes.
to understand, and they need to understand, look, that student can want to protest, but until you show up and sign your student out, because you'd have to do that if they were going to a doctor's appointment, they would have to do that if you were taking them on early out to head on to your family vacation. The same applies here. So transparent communication with parents and public education in Utah, it's a constitutional obligation under Article 10 of the Utah Constitution. It is not an informal arrangement. Again, parents, this is not an informal arrangement. Administrators, this is not an informal arrangement. The law is not hostile to protest. And I'll repeat again, it is protective of order.
I just think what you say is so incredibly important. If we can, for a minute, let's zoom out for a more eagle-eye view. I think it's important to look at this through another lens. When districts debate whether or not to escort students to the curb for political demonstrations, and at the same time, we have declining NAEP reading proficiency scores, chronic absenteeisms that have exploded post-2020. We have math recovery scores that are lagging nationally. But sure, let's make instructional hours optional when the issue trends on TikTok. It's really absurd. We're hemorrhaging instructional minutes in a system that's already running on a literacy deficit. And I think, Emily, there's the tension. You know, we're told every month that literacy is fragile. We're constantly fed this line that learning loss is significant. We're told that math recovery requires urgency. Go, go, go. We're also told that missing third period is somehow civic growth. And both cannot equally be true.
It's true. And I think this is where we find ourselves again in education is I would argue that, and I've said this for I've said this for about 3 years now. I felt like the state of Utah and our country, that we were finally able to address the issue about reading. Like it became a big enough talking point that we were finally ready to say what we are doing is not working, and we can't hide behind the effort of trying to make it work. We actually need to make a change.
Yeah.
And so one of the greatest things that I feel like we've been doing in Utah, and I would like to think also on a national stage, is coming back to some positive things on how reading is taught. But now we're also dealing with, why do we send our kids to school? Because now we're back to, all of a sudden, again, a precedent being set that it's for activism. It's for sending them out for protests. Like this is something that it's just kind of a floodgate that's opened.
Yep.
So if we are concerned about literacy, which we are, I mean, we passed law in Utah to address literacy, then we kind of have to be blunt for a second. You cannot close literacy gaps by sacrificing instructional continuity. So Utah spent the last several years emphasizing evidence-based reading instruction,
Hmm.
structured literacy,
Yep.
phonics alignment, early intervention models, and the cognitive science is clear. Literacy is built through repetition, direct instruction, and sustained exposure. It is not built through sporadic engagement, and every lost instructional period compounds.
Hmm.
So we'll just kind of, I guess we'll broaden that net, like you were saying. So
Hmm.
the data about reading is sobering. So the National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, also known or referenced as NAEP, show persistent reading stagnation and mathematics
Yep.
regression. In many states, fewer than 1/3 of eighth graders read at proficiency. Instructional time is not symbolic, it's actually cumulative cognitive exposure. And cognitive science is clear that literacy development requires repetition, structured practice, and consistency. The opportunity cost of lost instructional time compounds, especially for vulnerable populations. And when we are tipping into a realm where institutions or schools
Yep.
normalize during school hours things of this nature, they implicitly signal that academic time is elastic. And I would argue that it is not.
I, I just have to agree with you. And I think in all these situations, we have an institutional contradiction. On one hand, districts tell us that learning loss is catastrophic. On the other hand, again, there's that conundrum. They're telling us that missing school for a civic demonstration is somehow character development. They need to make up their mind. Which is it? Because you can't simultaneously claim emergency academic decline and treat instructional hours as negotiable.
And this is where we are trying to figure this out. And by we, I mean, I think everybody involved, parents,
Yeah. Hmm.
teachers, bless them. Like they are trying to do a job
Yeah.
and they have so many distractions every day. I mean, and to add this to the mix, and I'm going to say, okay, oh, well, a protest is one day. There was a lot of planning that went ahead. There was a lot of decompressing after the protest happened. I mean, you
Yep.
are days of interruption with
Hmm.
something this big that, again, has tipped within the walls of our schools.
Yep.
And beyond that, as if there wasn't already a trend almost of a mass exodus from public education, I just want to say, when we are not clear on our policies on this, and when we create this institutional chaos,
Hmm.
the institutional credibility erodes when the public sees or feels that their priorities appear inconsistent. So, if schools intend to integrate civic engagement into curriculum, there are structured, lawful ways to do so. After school forums, you can do debate modules, supervised assemblies, parent authorized absences, but releasing students midday without academic accountability undermines both the instructional integrity and the public trust towards it.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important there, that parent authorized absences. Again, students are released to parents. They're not released to the streets. That we've talked about that. That's a legal liability, and a parent can't call in and say, "Hey, I'd like you to let my kid run wild today." That's not something that happens in school. So I think we're actually getting to a place where we're going to ask a deeper question, and I think many parents are asking it. The public's asking it as we watch these things play out in our state and nationwide. I think they're asking the question, who forms the civic conscience of a minor child? And maybe even a broader question, who should form the civic conscience of a child? Should it be parents? Should it be schools? Should it be algorithms? Because when institutions of learning signal, we won't discipline this because we actually trained them for this, that's not neutrality, that's formation. And parents are noticing,
Yeah.
and they find great issue with schools blurring and erasing the line between instruction and activism facilitation. And rightfully so, parents are asking, who is forming civic identity? I think many of them are taking stock in their own choices. They're asking the question, did our household do this? Did the institution do this? Did social media do this? The question's actually not partisan in any way, shape, or form. It's a structural question. And I'm glad parents are asking it because they should be asking
Absolutely. And there have been a lot of parents that have been
it. Hmm.
very concerned about this. So, parents, I'm on this kick where I'm just saying, parents, you've never been needed more. And
Yeah,
in this situation, I'm going to say it again, you've never been needed more. And
absolutely.
so, to some of you that are listening, you might think that this is just about like immigration policy, but it isn't actually primarily about immigration policy. This is actually about institutional role boundaries. And so I just wanted to clarify that real quick. We just want to highlight that public schools are constitutional entities. They exist to provide structured education under lawful authority. When schools blur the line between instruction and activism facilitation, they risk eroding parental trust. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, institutional neutrality and actually community cohesion. So children, they should understand civic engagement. They should also understand lawful process, structured debate, and the discipline of a democratic participation. There's civic continuity that depends not on emotional mobilization, but on procedural literacy. And for me, this one is so big.
Yeah.
Some of these protests that I have seen, the emotion is there, but I don't know that I believe that there is a lot of contextual understanding for what it is they're actually protesting for. There is a proper time. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I don't know if you see me shaking my head.
Yeah.
There is a space. I think we need to get back to instructional continuity. Please continue. I love what you're saying.
Well, and it's just the argument that when a student is activated emotionally towards a subject that they lack deep understanding to, and I don't want to discredit anybody that may be following the news, if it's on CNN Kids News, if it's on whatever news channel the parent decides to have on their TV at nighttime, like whatever it is they're exposed to, there is such a different level that exists beyond that. And I would argue that being in an educational institution, you have the opportunity to teach students how to do research papers, how to cite case law, how to cite the case number in, say, somebody that ICE was going after, their criminal record, they have a number, they have a history, they could read through that. Somebody might go into a career having been taught how to look at the information, but I think it is it's a disservice to send students out. And when I say send students out, I guess I show my hand in the fact that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
They're being sent out, and with a severe lack of understanding and comprehension towards what it is they're doing. And that's a big disservice. I would love to see, if we are interested in having our kids be literate, be able to research, formulate their thought, and put that on paper, edit it, develop it.
Yep.
Oh man, those kids would be something else. But to get them triggered emotionally and then send them out into the world during instructional hours, I can't think of something worse that they could be doing at this time for all the things that I've argued.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think what you're presenting presents kind of an inherent irony. In some of the images circulating online, we see students holding their signs about love, dignity, and constitutional rights. Meanwhile, others are throwing rocks at cars. There's adults filming them. Some show police stepping in to remind students what the sidewalks are for, because they're blocking traffic. And we recently had information come forward that a student has been hit and was taken in and for an emergency care. And when this happens, it tells us that the governance has been unclear. The expectations are unclear. And then the narrative fills the vacuum when we are derelict in our duty. And I think our schools have been derelict in their duty. And it's a conversation long worth having.
Absolutely. I actually really appreciate what you just said. The narrative fills the vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we mean by that? When our kids do not have the privilege of being given information that is relevant to their academic development, opinion and emotion fills that void. And there's a lot of that going on right now. And it's a vacuum. It's just going to, anyway, it's just going to take things to a really crazy place, which it has already. And we also have to come back to the long-term question about institutional trust.
Yes. Yep.
It's alarming. And we've seen videos of this. And I've been compiling all of them. So I have an understanding, the good, the bad, the ugly. But parents are showing up and they are taking their kids out of school when the protests are happening. And what I pick up on, a mom of 5, is the way they breathe. They're scared. Yeah. These parents are scared. Mm-hmm. They are angry, they're upset. They don't know where their child is. And again, this lady that had shown up and she approached the students of the protest and very startled says, "What's going on?" Well, and she ended up getting attacked. And one of these kids just had a wood a wood protest sign, on the back end. It looked like, just a cross here and the poster boards on front.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes that and he slams that down. Well, that was able to be blocked by a gentleman there. And she was able to be escorted away. There was one police there, and he was just standing by, and she goes and she begs him, says, help, this is why you're here. And he says, you need to stand over here, backup is coming. I mean, we're talking about minor children. We're talking about students and the violence that it escalated to because of, again, I'll argue a lack of understanding is a problem. So,
well, and if I can interrupt, we're talking about a lack of understanding coupled with a dereliction of supervisory and custodial duty.
Yes.
Those two things together don't go well.
Exactly. And if parents believe that schools are facilitating activism rather than instruction, the enrollment shifts will follow.
Yep.
If districts respond defensively rather than transparently, polarization deepens. The legacy issue is not protest. It is whether public education remains a stable civic institution trusted across political lines.
Oh, isn't that so true? A stable civic institution trusted across political lines. We've had so much division in our state and across the nation. It's been happening for over a decade. And I think that is the question of the day. Are our public education institutions going to remain a place that's trusted across political lines? Because I would argue that there's great distrust in our public institutions today. And this has only served to exacerbate that trust.
I agree.
So it's super interesting. I think as we're coming into the end here, I think there's three questions that parents can and should be asking at the next board meeting in your local area. And those questions are pretty simple. What is the district's written policy on coordinated walkouts during instructional hours? Do they have a policy? How are absences categorized? What are the liability protocols? And what are the liability protocols that are triggered if students leave campus? I think parents need to remember that they have every right to ask every question in the book. Do so calmly, avoid the theatrics, and focus just on the policy. I think it's super important that happens and that parents are showing up at the very next board meeting and addressing their school's dereliction and duty.
Absolutely. And thank you. And this is one thing that has always been very important to me. And when I've engaged in the public, I try to cite where that code is. Parents, it exists. Teachers, it exists. Administrators, LEAs, it exists there for you. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, inundated, confused, whether you support it or not, if you do support it, it's a reminder, be careful. If you don't address it or you don't agree with it, be careful, because there's situations here. And we have to be mindful. So if I were to say to administrators, they should audit right now as we speak. Attendance coding procedures, supervision protocols during demonstrations, communication clarity to parents prior to events, alignment between civic programming and instructional mandates. And you also have to recognize there's two realms that this exists in. There's signal. What are we signaling? Versus noise. So let me explain. So signal equals a policy clarity.
Yep.
Noise is viral outrage. The lever that matters is not commentary. It is actually the written procedure.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's why the law and our case law is so important. I've written a couple op-eds on Tinker and Bethel and some of these other cases that say not only do our schools need to preserve their educational mission, produce content neutral restrictions on that which disrupts their educational mission. I think it's so important. As we come into our close, I just want to leave people with some really great one-liners. And so I would offer, Emily, that liberty without order becomes volatility.
And I would offer that order without liberty becomes rigid oppression.
Oh, good one. Public schools are supposed to navigate that tension and not dissolve it.
Public schools are tasked with balancing both.
Yes.
And credibility is preserved when institutions remember their mandate.
Oh, and that, you're so smart. And that balance requires disciplined leadership. It's just so true.
I think that we need to remember a couple of things also about literacy. And I'm going to say literacy because of the arguments that, I guess I didn't share this. There was a situation where there was a sign up, no ice. Ice agents will not be served here. alarming. The person queried the store owners, their store, that's fine. But when asked what ICE stood for, they didn't know. When asked how many immigrants Obama had deported, because they didn't know. Have you watched his speeches throughout his 8 years, 2 terms, about that relationship that they've had and why border security was important? They had no idea. So when I say literacy, I actually mean literacy in every sense of the word.
Well, historical literacy and maybe even literacy in current events could be what you're talking about right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we want our kids to be educated.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want them to be activated to causes that they don't fully comprehend. And I think that is fair for whatever political view you hold. I think that's a fair statement for both, for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But liberty requires literacy.
Mm-hmm.
Literacy requires discipline.
Yes.
And legacy requires institutions that know their role.
I love it. I just love it. And I think that the future of liberty, honestly, I would ask the question, what if the future of liberty does not depend on elections, but actually on classrooms? What if literacy is not simply the ability to read, but the ability to discern truth? And what if legacy isn't something we inherit, but rather something we build or lose? But before we close, let's just remember this. Education is not neutral, it is directional. Every policy adopted, every curriculum selected, every standard lowered or raised moves a generation somewhere. And liberty requires an educated citizenry. Literacy requires disciplined instruction, and legacy requires adults willing to tell the truth about both.
Thank you. I love that. And I want to reach out to anybody that is listening. If you are a parent, stay engaged. And if you're a teacher, stay principled.
Yep.
If you serve on a board or in public office, stay lawful. Read those, understand them. What does it look like when it lands at the end of the day? How do you apply that? Institutions do not drift accidentally. They actually drift when no one is watching. So we're going to continue to watch. I'm going to continue to collect things, understand things, because these conversations matter. And I'm going to say, parents, you have never been needed more. Amen. And our public education system can still be a shining light. And we got to make sure that we understand what is required to make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Emily, I think we're going to sign off. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This has been Liberty, Literacy, and Legacy. Again, my name is Christina Bogus, and until next time, build wisely.
Thank you.